the Miluim, the inauguration of the Mishkan for the first time, there too, Aaron and his sons had to be sequestered for 7 days. The Gemara asked the question, yes, but how do you know that it's to connect, the pasuk means to connect, from the word lechaper is coming to connect to Yom Kippur. There are other holy days that also are only one day, which have karbanos, and karbanos are always coming to be mechaper, so therefore maybe it's coming to connect to, let's say, Shmini Atzeres. That's where we left off yesterday. So the Gemara had said that Shmini Atzeres is a continuation of Sukkos, and if there's no sequestration necessary for Sukkos, then surely there's no sequestration necessarily for Shmini Atzeres. So now the Gemara asks another question. The Gemara now is going to ask from Shavuos. So this is where we're up to, which is the fourth line, Ve'ema Atzeres, Deprisha Shivili Yom Echadu. Maybe the pasuk is referring not to Yom Kippur, but rather to Shavuos, which is also would be 7 days sequestering for 1 day of holiness, which is would be just like the Miluim, it would be just like Yom Kippur. Amar Rabbi Abba donin par echad va'ayel echad mi par echad va'ayel echad la'afuke atzeres dishnei elam ninu. Very simple answer. The animals that are brought on Yom Kippur are more analogous to the animals that are brought during the Miluim. There's one ram and there's one bull that is brought as the Torah itemizes by the Miluim, by the Kohanim having to bring for the Miluim. And it's the same one bull and one ram on Yom Kippur. Whereas on Shavuos, it's 2 rams. So therefore, if we have to connect it to one holy day, connect it to the holy day where the karbanos are most similar. That'll only work out if you hold that the offering on Yom Kippur is only 1 ram. But there's an opinion that says that the offering on Yom Kippur is 2 rams, in which case Yom Kippur is as dissimilar to the Miluim as Shavuos is. Where's this machlokes? Tanya. Rebbe Omer, Ayel Echad Hu, HaOmer Kan, Hu HaOmer B'chumash HaPekudim. So there's 2 places where the Torah itemizes the karbanos that are supposed to be brought on Yom Kippur. One is in Parshas Acharei Mos in Sefer Vayikra, and the other one is in Parshas Pinchas in Sefer Bamidbar. And each place talks about a ram that has to be brought. So according to Rebbe, it's the same ram. It's just a repeat of the same ram that's brought, that's discussed in Vayikra, is discussed in Bamidbar. However, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Omer Shnei Elam Heim Echad HaOmer Kan VeEchad HaOmer B'chumash HaPekudim. But Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon disagrees. He says no, they're 2 separate rams. One ram is for the atoning process, and the other ram is for the Karban Musaf. So it's 2 rams. And if it's 2 rams, according to this Tana, so then what gives you the right to connect Miluim to Yom Kippur any more than to Shavuos? The Gemara answers, Afilu tema Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Hasam chad l'chovas hayom v'chad l'musafim, la'afuke atzeres de teravayu chovas hayom ninhu. The Gemara says, but it's still, even according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Miluim is still more analogous to Yom Kippur than to Shavuos, because on Shavuos the 2 rams are both brought for what's called chovas hayom. Something special about the day of Shavuos requires the 2 rams, because the Torah says that the unique korban for Shavuos is the shtei halechem, is the 2 loaves of bread that are waved over the mizbeach, and accompanying those 2 loaves are 2 rams, according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. According to the Torah. But on Yom Kippur, even if you hold like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon that there are 2 rams, one ram is the standard holiday ram for the Karban Musaf, and the other one is the unique ram for Yom Kippur acting as an atonement. So the special ram that is L'chovas Hayom is similar to the one ram that is brought on the Miluim. Even according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, because for him the second ram is not unique to Yom Kippur, it's not a Chovas Hayom ram, it's a Karban Musaf ram. Okay, fine. Now the Gemara asks, okay, but still, I have another holiday that's 1 day, that maybe that Miluim is comparable to that more than Yom Kippur. What is that? Ve'ema Rosh Hashanah. Deprisha Shivli Yom Echadu. As we know that Rosh Hashanah is a 1-day holiday. It's only 2 days as a rabbinic enactment, but Midirais it's a 1-day holiday, and maybe only there is there supposed to be sequestration and connecting it to Miluim.
What does it mean with Deprisha Shivas Yomim when it's separated for 7 days before? So Miluim you were doing something, but what for Rosh
Deprisha
Hashanah?
is to sequester.
So where for Rosh Hashanah is it a person sequestered 7 days?
It's not. We're suggesting that. In other words, we're suggesting that just like by the Miluim there was a sequestration for 7 days for one day of something special, let us say that that's the halacha for Rosh Hashanah as well. In other words, instead of applying that to Yom Kippur, let's apply it to Rosh Hashanah instead. So Amar Rabbi Avahu, Danan Parva Ayil Shalo, Mi Parva Ayil Shalo, La'afuki Atzeres for Rosh Hashanah, Dit Tzibor Ninu. So Rabbi Avahu answers both to explain why the pasuk is not connecting to Shavuos, nor is it connecting to Rosh Hashanah. Why is that? Because in this respect, they are dissimilar to the Miluim, in that the Karban is the property of the Tzibor, both on Rosh Hashanah and on Shavuos, and on Yom Kippur, and for the Miluim, the Karban has to be brought by the Kohanim themselves. It is their property that they are offering as a Karban. Both for the Miluim, the Torah says, Kach lecha, take for yourselves Egel ben Bakar lechatos, a calf for a sin offering, right, etc. And also for Yom Kippur, it says, V'chiper ba'ado va'ad beso, that he's got to atone for himself and his household. So it's really the Kohen Gadol, Bezos Yavo Aharon El HaKodesh. With this, shall Aharon come into the Holy of Holies. It's for himself that he has to bring these karbanos, and therefore he has to pay for it on his own. So that's really what connects Yom Kippur to the Miluim, is the fact that the animals that he's bringing as karbanos, he pays for himself. It's not brought by the Tzibor's assets. The Gemara now says, Hanich leman da'amar kach lecha mishalecha, va'aseh lecha mishalecha, el leman da'amar mishal tzibor ma'ika lemeimar. So that only works out if you learn that the word lecha, when it's referred to in a pasuk where the Torah says kach lecha or aseh lecha, that refers to using your own money. When God instructs Moshe, for example, to aseh lecha shtei chatzot kesef, make for yourself 2 trumpets of silver. So there's one opinion that says that what Hashem was telling Moshe, make sure that you pay for it. It's got to be from your money, Moshe. It's not coming from community funds. And when God says to Moshe, Kach lecha samim, take for yourself incense, he's speaking to either the Kohanim or to Moshe, but that you have to pay for the incense for the Ketores, and it's not coming from community funds. But there's an opinion that says that when the Torah says the word lecha, it still means community funds. In which case, where do you see that the word lecha by the Miluim means that it's coming from the Kohen's money? Now, where do you see this machlokes? Tanya, kach lecha mishalcha va'aseh lecha mishalcha v'yikchu elecha mishal tzibor, divrei Rabbi Yoshia. When the Torah says take for yourself, when it talks about the samim, for the herbs for the ketores, that's where God is saying you take, meaning you, I think it's selecha. 1 second, where's the previous pasuk? Kach lecha samim, I believe, is the pasuk. Right. Kach lecha samim, which is, Kach lecha samim. It's Hashem speaking to Moshe. You take for yourself herbs for the ketores, right? Shlach lecha, right? Well, Rashi says l'daitcha, right? Rashi says l'daitcha. It's the same thing. But you see, when it says, so according to that opinion, according to Rabbi Yoshia, kach lecha and aseh lecha by the chatzotzros is where you have to use your own money, Moshe. But v'yikchu elecha, but they shall take, which is a reference to the shemen zayis, the oil for the Mishkan, that is supposed to come from community funds. But Rabbi Yonasan Omer, bein kach lecha, bein v'yikchu elecha mishal tzibor. Rabbi Yonasan says no. Whether it says lecha or whether it says they shall take, it always comes from community funds. Umat hamolomer kach lecha, kivyachol mishalcha ani rodse yosem mishalahem. That means something very totally different. It's as if God were saying to Moshe, even though I want you to use community funds, but I would be much happier if you yourself, Moshe, were bringing the ketores, if you yourself, Moshe, were making the trumpets, because I love you, Moshe, more than I love the rest of Klal Yisrael. And the reason why it's kavyachol, like Rashi speaks out, is God would never say that outright. God would never say outright that I reject the Jews and only choose you, Moshe Rabbeinu, because how could Hashem ever reject Klal Yisrael? But it's as if Hashem was saying that, almost in a sense, as if he were saying that Halavai Moshe, that all the Jewish people were like you. I much prefer your offering than I do for the Jewish people. But really, in reality, because the Jewish people have to participate in the Chatzotzros, in the Besamim, then really everyone has to pay for it. Abba Chanan Omar, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Kosav Echad Omer V'yasisa Lecha Aron Eitz, V'kosav Echad Omer V'yasir Aron Eitz Eishitim. HaKeitzad. So Abba Chanan follows along the reasoning of Rabbi Yonasan. He says, using Rabbi Yonasan's logic, that God is really saying, I prefer Moshe's to the rest of Klal Yisrael's, we find a stira, we find a contradiction in the Psukim. One pasuk says that you, Moshe, take an ark, and you make yourself an ark. Another pasuk says that they shall make the ark. So how do you reconcile it? Is it the Jewish people that are making the ark, or is it Moshe making the ark? So he says, Kan bisman she'Yisrael osin ritzonu shel makom, Kan bisman she'en osin ritzonu shel makom. The answer is that when the Jewish people are not fulfilling God's will, when God is upset with them, then Hashem says to Moshe, you make it. Halavai, that only you would have to make it. Right? And when the Jewish people are reconciled with Hashem, so then Hashem says, yes, I'm happy for them to participate as well. But in any event, we have this kasha. We have a kasha. We're left off with a kasha. According to the Mandomer Rabbi Yonasan, who says that even when the Torah says kach lecha, it's a reference to the Jewish people. So we see that by the Miluim, the karbanos were not of the Kohanims themselves. They were the community's karbanos. So why not connect the karbanos of the Miluim to Rosh Hashanah and to Shavuos, and instead you connect them to Yom Kippur? So the Gemara answers as follows. Ad kan lo pligi ela bekichos da'alma va'asios da'alma. Kichos da'alma kach lecha samim, asios da'alma aseh lecha shtei chatzos ros kesef. Is I'll tell you why. The machlokas between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan is only other places in the Torah where God says, take for yourself or do for yourself, such as this herbs for the ketores, or the trumpets that Moshe is supposed to manufacture. There's a machlokas. But when it comes to the Miluim and Yom Kippur, it's clear from the context of the pasuk that the Kohanim are the ones who have to pay for that korban. Where do you see this? The Miluim mechdi. Let's take a look at by the Miluim. It said, let's see. Ksiv ve'el b'nei Yisrael tadaber leimor kichu seir izim lechatos. And then right afterwards it says, Vayomer el Aharon kach lecha egel ben bakar lechatos. What the first previous pasuk says, speak to the Jewish people and tell them to take their own sin offering of a goat, and then speak to Aaron and tell him to take a calf for a sin offering. So you clearly see, he says, Lama li, so why does he need to bring a separate chatos? Shma mina kach lecha mishalachahu. So that you clearly see that it's Aaron's offering, because the tzibur is completely separated from Aaron. They bring their sin offering, he brings his sin offering. And so from contextually, you see very clearly that kach lecha means take it for yourself, Aaron.
So Gemara is saying there's no machlokes there in this case?
That's right. There's no machlokas in that case. Everyone would agree that when it came to the Miluim, it had to come from Aaron's pocket. Mm-hmm. And b'Yom HaKippurim mechdiksiv. And the same thing by Yom Kippur. Let's see. It says, Bezos yavo Aaron el HaKodesh, Befar ben bakar lechatas v'gomer, and then right afterwards it says Ume'es hadas b'nei Yisrael yikach shnei si reizim lechatas v'ikrivis parachatas asher lo. So lamali. So in other words, you see that Aaron has to come into the Holy of Holies with a special bull, right? And then he's supposed to take from Bnei Yisrael 2 goats, and then he's supposed to offer his bull as a chatas. Why does he need to have his separate chatas? So you see, Shma Mina, Hai Lo Mishalohu, that clearly it's specifically for him. It's not on behalf of the tzibur. So both by the Miluim and Yom Kippur, contextually you see very clearly everyone would agree that it has to be specifically for the Kohanim who are bringing it. And that's really what connects Miluim to Yom Kippur more than any other holiday. So that's according to this explanation. Now we're going to see another explanation as to why Miluim is more comparable to Yom Kippur. Ravashi Omar Danin par lechatas va'ayil la'ola mi par lechatas va'ayil la'ola lafuke Rosh Hashanah ve'atzeres de teravayu olos ninu. Another very simple distinction. Granted that there's one bull and one ram that's brought on Rosh Hashanah, just like Yom Kippur. The difference, however, is that on Yom Kippur, the bull is for a chatas, and the ayil is for an ola, right? And that's exactly the way it was done during the Miluim. The bull was for a chatas, and the ayil was for an ola. Whereas by Rosh Hashanah and Shavuos, both the bull and the ram were for an ola. So that's another reason. So even if you're going to figure out a way to discount the number of karbanos, like we wanted to say by Shavuos, even not counting that distinction, the fact of the matter is that all of the karbanos on Shavuos and on Rosh Hashanah are for olas, and the karban of the bull and the ram on Yom Kippur, the bull is for the chatas and the ram is for an ola. Ravina says, I'll give you another answer. Danin avoda b'kohen gadol me avoda b'kohen gadol lafuke kulhu kushyasin delav avoda b'kohen gadol ninhu. Ravina says, I can answer all of the questions from above with one sweeping explanation. Yom Kippur is different and from all the other holidays and is more analogous to the Miluim for the simple reason is that all of the other holidays, the avoda can be done by a regular kohen, whereas on Yom Kippur, the avoda can only be done by a kohen gadol. And that's exactly the same thing by the Miluim. It had to be done by Aharon. His sons participated, but Aharon had to be part of it as well. V'ika da Amri, others learned that Ravina's answer was as follows. Amar Ravina, done in avoda techila me avoda techila lafuki hani delav techila ninu. We connect two firsts. There's a first time for the Miluim, and there's a first time for Yom Kippur. So therefore, that's what makes them more common, to have more in common than any other holiday. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean they're both firsts? My techila. Ilay me techila b'kohen gadol hainu kamaisa. Maybe you'll tell me that just like the Miluim was the first time the Kohen Gadol did the Avoda period in the Mishkan, so too Yom Kippur is the first holiday where the Kohen Gadol does the Avoda exclusively. But if that's the argument, so then it's the same thing as the first answer, that they both involve the Kohen Gadol. That can't be what the word Techila means. Ela Avoda Techila b'makom me Avoda Techila b'makom. But rather what it means is that they're two firsts as far as place. For the first time, Avoda was done in a special place called the Mishkan. That was by the Miluim. By Yom Kippur, it's the first time that a special Avoda is done in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So that's what makes them have in common. It's the first and only day of the year where there's an exclusive place of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's the only time when the Kohen does the Avoda in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, just like it was the first time that the Avoda was done in the Mishkan by the Miluim. That's what connects them. Ki asa Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Masni Chada, Rabbi Shua ben Levi Masni Tarti. So now we have an interesting machlokes. Up until now, we've been learning that it seems like to everyone that there are two things that you derive out of the pasuk of Miluim. The verb la'asos was connecting to para aduma. That's what we saw yesterday. The verb lechaper is coming to connect to Yom Kippur, that both for the Para Aduma Kohen and for the Yom Kippur Kohen Gadol, they need to be sequestered for 7 days before the day that they either do the Avoda of the Para Aduma or the Avoda of Yom Kippur. However, Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with all of that. Rabbi Yochanan says it's only one. You only learn one of them from the Miluim and not both of them. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Masni Tarti, he says you learn both of them from the Miluim. Rabbi Yochanan Masni Chada, because it says Lasos lechaper elu maaseh Yom Kippurim. He says that both the verbs Lasos and lechaper refer to Yom Kippur exclusively. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Masni Tarti Lasos elu maaseh para lechaper elu maaseh Yom Kippurim. He says no. That just like we had seen yesterday, La'asos refers to the Paraduma and Lechaper connects to Yom Kippur. So now we have to explain Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Masni Chada v'ha'anan tanan shivas yomim kodem Yom Kippurim shivas yomim kodem Sreifas Hapara. But we just cited both Mishnayos. We have the Mishnah in Yoma, which says that there's sequestering for 7 days for the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur, and we have the Mishnah in Maseches Para, which says there's sequestration for the guy who's going to do the Para Aduma for 7 days. So it seems like they're both connected, right? They're both learning it from the same source. The Gemara says no. Maila ba'alma. That's not true. The requirement of sequestration for the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur is a din d'oraisa that we learn from the Miluim. We'll tell you Rabbi Yochanan. But the halach of sequestration for 7 days for the guy doing the Para Aduma, that's not mid'oraisa, that's d'Rabbanan. Remember we saw yesterday that the Chachamim had special chumras that they placed on the Para Aduma because of the fact that they had a leniency that they allowed a Tavul Yom to be involved with the Para Aduma. So they had to be machmir in order to sort of counterbalance that, and they said therefore that you can only use kalim that are not makabel tuma. In the same vein, they also said that you have to sequester the kohen who's going to be doing the avod of the paraduma, not because the Torah requires that, because we want to be especially machmir. So that's why you'd have to learn that. V'ha Amar Rabbi Minyumi Bar Chilkiya Amar Rabbi Mechasya Bar Idi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Ka'asher Asa Bayom Hazeh Tziva Hashem La'asos Lechaper Aleichem La'asos Elu Maseh Par Lechaper Elu Maseh Yom HaKippurim. So Rabbi Yochanan was quoted by his Talmidim as stating explicitly that the pasuk by the Miluim is both has a reference to Para Aduma and to Yom Kippur. So how can Rabbi Yochanan say in a separate statement that the pasuk only refers to Yom Kippur and not to Para Aduma? Answers the Gemara Hahu de Rabbi, that statement of Rabbi Yochanan that it refers to both is from his Rebbe, but he himself holds that the pasuk of Miluim only refers to Yom Kippur. And how do I know this? As Rabbi Yochanan was quoted elsewhere, that it's only in the name of his Rabbi Yishmael, that he holds that that there's a din d'oraisa by the para aduma that's derived from the miluim. But he himself personally disagrees with his Rebbe, and he says, and we don't really see why that is. The Gemara is not going to go into why, like what compelling argument does Rabbi Yochanan have to argue with his Rebbe? Perhaps we can derive it later on, but Rabbi Yochanan holds that the pasuk is only, of the miluim, is only connecting to Yom Kippur and is not connecting to para aduma. So Amarle Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan Mehecha Kayalfas La Mimiluim Imami Luim Kolakosiv Bahen Ma'akev Bahen Af Hachanami Kolakosiv Bahen Ma'akev Bahen. Reish Lakish challenges Rabbi Yochanan. Now he's not challenging Rabbi Yochanan as far as 1 versus 2. His challenge to Rabbi Yochanan is, where do you get the halacha of sequestration on Yom Kippur? You're getting it from Miluim, as we've been learning all along. But according to that, just like by the Miluim, the requirement of sequestration was something that if it wasn't done, you could not do the miluim, you could not do the avoda. So too, you should make the same argument that on Yom Kippur, if you do not sequester the Kohen Gadol, then he cannot do the avoda on Yom Kippur. Is that what you're suggesting? Asks Reish Lakish. V'chi tema hachanami, and if you're going to say taka, that's the halacha. V'hatananu maskinin lo kohen acher v'lo katani mafrishin. What about the understudy Kohen Gadol? Remember we learned about that yesterday. They designate a secondary Kohen Gadol to act as the understudy of the regular Kohen Gadol, because he may develop some kind of psul. He'll become tameh, he'll develop a mum, whatever it is. Now, according to you, this understudy Kohen Gadol should have to be sequestered also. But that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah does not say that we sequester him, it just says that we designate him. Maybe you'll tell me that the word designation also means sequestering. Lisni o idi v'idi maskinin, o idi v'idi mafrishin. Well, then the language of the Mishnah doesn't make any sense, because the Mishnah uses two different words for the same thing. For the Kohen Gadol, it says sequester. For the understudy, it says designate. You should either use the same verb of maskinin for both, or use the same verb mafrishin for both. But the fact that you use two different verbs means that one you sequester and the other one you simply designate. So it turns out that, let's say the Kohen Gadol becomes tameh in the middle of his period of sequestration, on the 4th day. Then they pull up the understudy and say, okay, time for you to do the avoda. But I haven't been sequestered for the last 3 or 4 days, right? So how can I do the avoda on Yom Kippur? So this is Reish Lakish's challenge to Rabbi Yochanan. So Amar Lei, so Rabbi Yochanan responds to Reish Lakish, Elamar mehecha yalifla. So Reish Lakish, what's the alternative? So Taka, you tell me, where do you get the law of sequestration on Yom Kippur from if you're not going to derive it from the Miluim? So Amar misinai, I get it from the law of Kabbalah Satorah at Har Sinai. Dechasiv vayishkon kavod Hashem al Har Sinai vayichaseu he'anon sheishes yamim vayikra el Moshe bayom hashvi'i. The Torah says that the glory of God rested on Har Sinai with the cloud for 6 days, and then after 6 days, on the 7th day, God summons Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe walks into the cloud to receive the Torah. So Mechdi, Ksiv vayikra el Moshe bayom hashvi'i, my sheishes yamim. Why the Torah is superfluous in its language? Why does it have to say, if it already tells me that God calls to Moshe on day 7, why then does it have to say that the cloud was on for 6 days? Obviously it was there for 6 days if it says that on the 7th day Hashem called to Moshe. So that extraneous language is for what? Zeh bana'av shekol hanichnas b'machane shchina ta'un prishas shisha. This teaches me that anytime you're going to go into the innermost sanctum of the divine, meaning either into the cloud on top of Har Sinai or into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur, you need to be sequestered for 6 days. And that's what we see by Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's where I learn it from, says Reish Lakish. Wait a minute, V'hanan Shivatanan. It doesn't say sequestration for 6 days, it says for 7 days. So where do you get the 7th day? The Gemara answers, Masnisan Rebbe Yehuda ben Beseirahi, Dechayesh Latumas Beso. The answer is that this goes according to Rebbe Yehuda ben Beseira, who was worried about the possibility of becoming Tameh through your wife. Now let's understand what this means. Basically, you see from Moshe Rabbeinu that sequestration is necessary for 6 days before you go into the Machaneh Shechina, before you go into the Holy of Holies. Where do you get the 7th day? There's another concern, and that is that we can't allow a Kohen Gadol to be intimate with his wife 7 days before Yom Kippur. Why? Because maybe, God forbid, she'll become a Nida in the course of their intimacy. And the halacha is that when a man is intimate with a woman who's a nida, he becomes tameh for 7 days. So if we were to allow him to be at home for that day before the 6 days, he might become tameh for 7 days, and that would preclude him from doing the avoda on Yom Kippur. And that's the reason why that we add on an additional day of sequestration. So the way I'm understanding it is as follows. If we only had the concern of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, then we wouldn't require the Kohen to be sequestered in the Beis HaMikdash for 7 days. We would just say, let her go stay with her parents, and he has to stay with his buddies. But why do we have to mamish sequester him for that period of time? That we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, that when you're going to go into the Machaneh Shechina, you got to be on top of Har Sinai for 6 days before, which is like the Beis HaMikdash. Then we add the 7th day, because now that we're sequestering for 6, we sequester him for the 7th out of the concern of Tumah with his wife. So Amarle, we're just going to go a little bit further. Amarle Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish, Bishlama l'didi di alfina mimiluim. Hainu detanya zeh v'zeh mazan alav kol shiva mikol chato shahayusham. The Havai Nami Hazah b'Miluim. So Rabbi Yochanan now challenges Reish Lakish in another way. I learn it out from the Miluim. So it works out well according to me. Why? As we'll see later on, during those 7 days of sequestration, what do we do to the Kohen Gadol? We're sprinkling him every day with the ashes of the Paraduma to purify him just in the event, just in case he became in contact with Tumah. So, and we take all of the ashes of all of the different paradumas that were in the temple, that were manufactured over the course of centuries. And Rashi says, even from the para of Moshe Rabbeinu, which was always mixed into the other ashes. El l'didach the Yalfis Misinai, and the reason why we do that is because just like on Yom Kippur, during the Miluim also, the Kohanim were sprinkled for 7 days during their period of sequestration. But El l'didach the Yalfis Misinai Hazah b'Sinai mihavai. But according to you, who learned it out from Moshe Rabbeinu atop Har Sinai for 6 days, where do you ever see that Moshe Rabbeinu was sprinkled with anything during those 6 days of sequestration? So Amar Lei v'litaimech minicha b'miluim dam hachamayim. So Reish Lakish says back to him, but it's no better according to you. Yeah, it's true that by the Miluim they were sprinkled, but they were sprinkled with blood of sacrifices, not with water of the Paraduma. So what kind of comparison are you making? So Halo Kasha, the Tani Rabbi Chia, Nichnasu Mayim Tachas Dam. Rabbi Yochanan says that's not a problem, because there's a general principle that the ashes of the Paraduma, the water of the Paraduma, is the surrogate for sacrificial blood to purify someone. So that I can say is an explanation as to why the Paraduma water is a surrogate, is like a vicarious substitute for the blood of the Miluim. So that you can't challenge me. But Ela l'didach, but according to you, Reish Lakish, Hazah b'Sinai mihavai. Where do we ever see any sprinkling at Har Sinai of Moshe? So Amar Lei, Mala ba'alma. Reish Lakish's answer is, you're right. Midioraisa, the Kohen Gadol does not have to be sprinkled on the 7 days of sequestration. Right? It's only a special chumrah. It's only an additional chumrah, because if you're learning it from Har Sinai, there's no real requirement midioraisa of sprinkling. This is where we'll hold it here for today. We'll continue the discussion tomorrow.